Sabah al-Ful. Right now we're going to continue talking about demonstrative pronouns in Arabic, what we call ism al-ishara. And here we're going to be focusing on how to use them in Egyptian and Levantine dialect forms. If you haven't yet, I would really encourage you to go back and take a look at the video on how ism al-ishara works in Fusha, in formal Arabic, because the principles are very, very similar. We're going to use them almost exactly the same way. We can use them in phrases, or we can use them to construct whole sentences. There's a lot of minor variation in pronunciation of these pronouns from dialect to dialect, certainly from country to country, definitely from city to city, sometimes literally from neighborhood to neighborhood in the Arab world. So remember, as you're seeing these forms that we're demonstrating on the board, that they don't represent the totality of every single little variation that you're going to encounter, but your ears should be able to tell you when demonstrative pronouns are being used. In Shami, for example, two forms that you might encounter for the masculine, instead of هذا in Fusha, we might hear هذا instead, or just had. Right? So there's variation, but we can hear the connection between hada and hada, right? It's very clear. For hadihi in Fusha, we might instead hear hadi, or sometimes hai. And for haula, which again we only use for human plurals, right? We might hear something like hadul. And we can use them in exactly the same way we use them in Fusha. So if we wanted to say, this is an old house, we could say, هذا البيت قديم, or قديم, right? This house, we have our mubtada, qadim, it is old. Now, again, just as in Fusha, if we added an alif lam to the adjective, we would have hada al-bayt al-qadim, and we have a phrase, right? This old house. But we're waiting for our khabar, the information of the sentence. So we might say, for example, hada al-bayt al-qadim kabir, it's big. One variation that you do hear in Levantine sometimes is that ism al-ishara kind of gets elided, and all we hear of it is ha, hal bayt al-kabir, right? We could say had al-bayt al-kabir, this old house, or hal bayt al-kabir if we're talking fast, and we elide it. And once again, we don't really have orthographic conventions for writing dialect. This is one way that it's commonly expressed, but there's no rule book for how to write in dialect correctly. It's sort of an emerging consensus, you might say. In Egyptian, the forms are also a little bit different. Instead of هذا, we typically hear da, which again is also sometimes written differently. Da, dalha, like that. For a feminine noun, you're going to hear di, and for a plural, again a human plural, you'll hear dul. Now, if the demonstrative pronoun is a subject, the mubtada, it comes at the beginning, just as we've already seen, right? This is a girl, for example. We could say di bint. But Egyptian Arabic also has a little idiosyncrasy. If we're forming phrases with this demonstrative pronoun, if we want to say this girl, for example, then the demonstrative pronoun is usually at the end of the phrase. So if we want to say this girl, you might think we would say dil bint, but instead we say al-bint di. Right? Now we have a phrase. So if we wanted to make a sentence, for example, this girl is a student, we could say al-bint di طالبة, full stop. Or if we wanted to say these students, we wouldn't say دول الطلاب, that would mean those are the students, right? We would have to say الطلاب دول. الطلاب دول, let's say those students or these students are Egyptian. الطلاب دول مصريين. So we have that slight flip in Egyptian when we're using اسم الإشارة as a mubtada phrase with a real noun in it.